Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be exploring some excerpts from the New Testament.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we've got a lot to
A
cover.
lot.
We're talking about the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, plus Acts of the Apostles, and even some of Paul's letters.
It's a lot of material for sure.
Yeah, it is a lot.
But the goal is to kind of like pull out the key takeaways, maybe even some surprises about Jesus's life and teachings
Right.
and the beginnings of Christianity.
Okay, so where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, a good place to start might be Matthew's Gospel,
Okay.
which begins with the birth of Jesus.
Right.
And it immediately connects this to the Hebrew Bible.
The prophecy angle.
Yeah, exactly.
Matthew really emphasizes how Jesus' birth fulfills prophecies like the virgin birth and being called Emmanuel.
Right.
But wouldn't some Jewish people at the time have found this claim kind of controversial?
Absolutely. Yeah, for Matthew's largely Jewish audience,
Yeah.
this was a really bold statement,
Right.
linking Jesus to their hopes and scriptures,
Yeah.
even though this wasn't universally accepted.
So Matthew's really setting the stage then for how he's going to frame Jesus' entire life and ministry. It's all connected back to those Old Testament prophecies.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things that always kind of gets me are the stories about Jesus calling his disciples.
Right.
It's just amazing to me how these ordinary people, they just drop everything
do.
to follow him.
Yeah.
I mean, fishermen just leaving their nets behind. That's
I know.
pretty dramatic.
Dramatic, but also very deliberate.
Okay.
Those fishermen weren't just any workers.
Right.
They would have been the breadwinners for their families.
Right.
So this wasn't just a career change.
Right.
It was a complete upheaval of their entire lives and its responsibilities.
Wow, that really adds a whole other layer to this story.
Yes.
And it wasn't just fishermen either, was it?
No, it wasn't.
We had tax collectors, women.
Yeah.
It was a real mix of people.
It was a diverse group, and that's one of the things that's so fascinating about it.
Right.
It suggests that Jesus's message really transcended typical social and religious boundaries of the time.
Okay, but I have to ask, what about the miracles? I mean, healing a leper, calming a storm, walking on water.
Yeah.
Those seem like they were meant to get everyone's attention.
Yes, and they were seen as proof that he was the Messiah.
Right.
But also these acts challenged the religious power structure at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who had the authority to heal or to control nature?
Right.
It raised some really big questions.
Yeah, it makes those miracles more than just these amazing feats.
Yes.
They become these pivotal moments that challenge the status quo.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've got prophecies, disciples, miracles.
Yeah.
What about the core of Jesus' message, his teachings?
Well,
You're talking about the kingdom of God, repentance, forgiveness, even loving your enemies?
right.
That's a lot to take in.
It is a lot. And he used parables, stories with these deeper meanings to get these ideas across. Like, take, for example, the parable of the prodigal son.
Okay.
On the surface, it's about forgiveness.
Right.
But it also speaks to this extravagant welcome that the father gives.
Right.
And if you think about that in the context of social norms, back then,
Yeah.
that was a radical departure
Totally.
from what was expected.
You know, that's a great point because I think we often kind of gloss over the cultural context.
Yeah.
But those details really bring those parables to life.
Absolutely.
And there are so many of them.
There are.
The Good Samaritans, the sour, each one a microcosm of some larger message.
Right. And they're not just these abstract ideas either.
Right.
They're packed with situations and dilemmas that people still face today.
Yeah.
Family dynamics, societal expectations, those themes run throughout.
I've always wondered about those parables. Like, why use stories instead of just like directly stating his teachers?
Well, parables have a way of kind of bypassing our defenses.
Okay.
They slip into our minds through story, and then bam,
Yeah.
we're left to ponder the meaning and how it applies to our own lives.
This makes me think about the clashes that Jesus had with the Pharisees and Sadducees.
Yes.
I mean, those must have been some really intense debates.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Especially the Pharisees, who were
Right.
very focused on like meticulously following the law.
Yes.
So when Jesus heals someone on the Sabbath,
Right.
it wasn't just about breaking the rules. It was like
No.
this fundamental difference in values.
Exactly.
He argued that compassion should sometimes supersede rigid adherence to the law,
Right.
which is a point that still resonates today, right? Like,
Absolutely.
when is it okay to bend the rules?
Yes.
What's more important, the letter of the law or the spirit of it?
Right.
But that clash with the Pharisees was just the beginning, wasn't it?
It was just the beginning, yeah.
And that's actually where we'll pick up next time.
Yes, next time we will explore those events that led to the crucifixion.
Right.
And we'll unpack its significance for Christianity.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about those escalating tensions between Jesus and the religious authorities.
Yeah.
And those conflicts ultimately led to his trial and crucifixion.
Right.
Which is where we'll pick up now. And this feels It feels heavy even all these centuries later.
It is a weedy subject for sure.
Yeah,
The Gospels don't shy away from describing the brutality of the events.
right.
Betrayal, arrest, a mock trial, torture, and then a horrific death on the cross.
Yeah,
And it raises some really profound questions
yeah.
about suffering and injustice,
Right,
and even the nature of God
right.
that people grapple with to this day.
I'm trying to imagine what it must have been like for the disciples.
Oh,
Their leader, their friend, their hope just suddenly gone.
devastating doesn't even begin to describe it.
Yeah,
They had devoted years of their lives to following Jesus.
right.
It would have been like their whole world turned upside down.
And yet, this is followed by the resurrection,
Yes,
which completely changes
it
everything.
does.
For Christians, it's not just a happy ending,
Yeah.
it's like the foundation of their entire belief system.
Exactly. The resurrection is the cornerstone of the Christian faith.
Right.
It redefines life and death,
Yeah.
and the very possibility of hope in the face of despair.
You know, this raises a question for me.
Okay,
We've been talking about all these challenges to authority, religious and political.
right?
Did Jesus's interactions with women also challenge the social norms of the time?
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah,
Yeah, think about the role of women in that society,
right,
largely excluded from religious leadership and scholarship.
right,
But Jesus engaged women in theological discussions,
right.
accepted them as disciples,
Yeah.
and even entrusted them with spreading the news of his resurrection.
That's right. Mary Magdalene was the first to see the risen Jesus,
Exactly.
and she ran to tell the other disciples,
Right.
becoming, in essence, the first apostle.
It's a detail that's often overlooked.
Yeah.
But it completely upends those traditional power structures.
Yeah.
I mean, for Jesus, spiritual authority wasn't bound by gender roles,
Right.
which was a really radical idea for the time.
It's amazing how, even though these texts are about Jesus, they
Yeah.
also give us all this an insight into the world he lived in.
It's true.
We see Roman occupation, different Jewish sects,
Right.
and just the everyday realities of people's lives. It all adds this important context to Jesus's words and actions.
It does. The Gospels offer us a glimpse into this pivotal moment in history, a time of great social and political upheaval.
Okay, back to those confrontations.
Okay.
We talked about the incident where Jesus healed a man with a wizard hand on the Sabbath,
Right?
and it really angered the Pharisees.
Yes.
Why was working on the Sabbath such a big deal?
Well, remember, the Pharisees believed in strict adherence to the law,
Right,
and working on the Sabbath was expressly forbidden.
right.
They saw it as a direct violation of God's commandment.
Okay,
But Jesus countered that compassion and healing
right.
were more important than rigid adherence to rules.
Okay.
He was, in essence, reinterpreting the law itself,
Right.
which was a radical and even dangerous move.
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah.
Jesus is constantly challenging not only what people believe,
Uh-huh.
but also how they practice their faith.
Yes.
Are there other examples of this?
Oh, there are many.
Okay,
But the story of the woman caught in adultery is a particularly powerful one.
okay,
The Pharisees wanted to stone her, as prescribed by the law.
right,
But Jesus turns the tables on them with that famous line,
right.
"Let he who is without sin cast the first stone."
Such a powerful statement.
It is.
He's calling out their hypocrisy
Yeah.
and forcing them to confront their own shortcomings.
Yes.
He's advocating for mercy over judgment,
Absolutely.
and it's a dilemma we still face today.
We do.
When is it okay to show compassion instead of enforcing the rules?
Right.
When is forgiveness warranted?
These are enduring questions.
They are.
And that's why these stories still resonate with us even centuries later.
Yeah.
They hold up the mirror to our own values
Yeah.
and challenge us to think critically about how we live our lives.
So we've talked about prophecies, teachings, miracles,
Yeah.
conflicts with authorities, and how Jesus interacted with women.
Right?
But now we kind of have to address the crucifixion itself.
Yes, this is where things get incredibly difficult,
Right.
both emotionally and theologically.
Yeah.
The Gospels describe the betrayal, the arrest, the mock trial, the torture, the agonizing death on the cross.
Right.
It's a brutal scene
It is.
that forces us to confront the reality of suffering
Yeah.
and the complexities of faith.
It raises so many
Yes,
questions
it does.
about the nature of God.
Yes,
If Jesus was truly the Son of God,
right,
why did he have to suffer such a horrific death?
right.
Where was God in all of this?
Those are questions that have haunted theologians and believers for centuries.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers.
Right.
Some see the crucifixion as a necessary sacrifice for the sins of humanity.
Mhm.
Others view it as an act of ultimate love and selflessness.
Right.
And still others struggle to reconcile the violence and suffering with their understanding of a loving God.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly difficult for Jesus's followers to make sense of it all.
Imagine being one of the disciples,
Right.
witnessing the crucifixion, feeling that sense of utter loss and despair.
Yeah.
Their leader, their teacher, their friend,
Yeah.
brutally executed.
Right.
It would have been a crisis of faith unlike any other.
And yet, as we discussed, the resurrection transforms everything.
It does. It's the ultimate triumph over death,
Right.
the promise of new life,
Yeah.
and the foundation for the Christian message of hope and salvation.
Right.
The resurrection is what allowed the disciples to move forward,
Right.
to spread the message of Jesus,
Yeah.
and to build the early church.
And that's a perfect segue to our next topic.
Okay.
The challenges faced by those early Christians.
Yes.
They were a small, marginalized group,
Right.
often persecuted by both Jewish and Roman authorities.
Yes.
How did they even begin to organize themselves and their beliefs?
The book of Acts provides a fascinating glimpse into those early days of the Christian movement.
Okay.
We see the disciples struggling to understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus
Right.
in a world that often rejected and persecuted them.
And they had to figure out how to live out their faith in a world that was hostile to their message.
Yeah, they did.
It wasn't always easy, was it?
No, not at all. They faced internal disagreements,
Right.
external persecution,
Yeah.
and the constant challenge of interpreting Jesus' teachings for a new and rapidly changing world.
One of the biggest challenges they faced, I would think, was the question of whether Gentiles needed to convert to Judaism to become Christians.
That's right, it was a major point of contention.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the very identity of this new faith was at stake.
Yeah.
Was it an offshoot of Judaism?
Right.
Or something entirely new?
So how did they resolve this?
Well, the book of Acts describes a pivotal meeting in Jerusalem
Okay.
where the apostles and elders gathered to debate this very issue,
Okay.
essentially the first church council.
Wow.
And after much discussion,
Yeah.
they ultimately decided that Gentile converts didn't have to follow all the Jewish laws,
Okay.
like circumcision.
Wow, that was a huge turning point.
It was. This decision opened the doors for Christianity to spread beyond its Jewish roots
Right.
and reach a much wider audience.
Right.
It marked the beginning of Christianity's transformation
Yeah.
into a truly global religion.
And that's where Paul enters the picture, right?
Exactly.
He becomes this tireless missionary.
Yes.
Traveling all over the Roman Empire, spreading the gospel to the Gentiles.
That's right. Paul was instrumental in shaping early Christian theology and practice.
Yeah.
His letters, which make up a significant portion of the New Testament,
Right.
offer profound insights into the challenges and triumphs of those early Christian communities.
And those letters aren't always the easiest to understand.
No, they're not.
Paul can be quite complex and challenging.
He can.
What are some of the key themes he explores?
Well, he grapples with these big questions about sin and grace,
Okay.
law, freedom,
Right.
and the nature of Christ.
Right.
He's wrestling with how to apply Jesus' teachings to the real-world challenges
Yeah.
faced by these new Christian communities.
And he also dealt with a lot of practical matters, right?
It did, yes.
Like divisions within the churches.
Yes.
Questions about sexual morality. Even what to do about people speaking in tongues.
He did. His letters provide a fascinating glimpse into the day-to-day lives of those early Christians
Right.
and the issues they faced.
Yeah.
Paul offers guidance on everything from marriage and divorce
Okay.
to handling disagreements and dealing with false teachers.
So we've gone from the Gospels, which
Yes.
tell the story of Jesus,
Right.
to the book of Acts, which shows us the early church in action, to Paul's letters, which provide this theological depth and practical guidance. It's amazing how all these different texts,
It is.
written by different authors in different contexts,
Yes.
come together to form this larger narrative about Christianity.
It is quite remarkable.
It is.
And we're not done yet.
Oh, really?
There's still much more to explore.
Okay.
We'll pick up our deep dive after a quick break.
And we're back, continuing our deep dive into the New Testament. You know, as we've been talking about these texts, I've been thinking about how different Christian denominations interpret them.
Right.
It's not a monolithic faith, is it?
Not at all.
Christianity is incredibly diverse with a wide range of beliefs and practices.
Yeah.
And a lot of those differences come down to how different groups interpret the New Testament.
Right.
For example, some Christians emphasize the importance of good works for salvation,
Right.
while others focus more on faith alone.
Yes.
Where do those differing viewpoints come from?
Well, those different perspectives can often be traced back to interpretations of Paul's letters,
Okay.
particularly his letter to the Romans.
Okay.
It's a very complex and nuanced debate that has shaped Christian theology for centuries.
And then there are the sacraments like baptism and communion.
Right.
They're central to some Christian traditions, but not as important to others.
That's right. The New Testament provides the basis for these practices, but different churches have developed different understandings
Right.
of their significance and how they should be administered.
Okay.
Even within a single denomination, you might find a range of interpretations.
So it's like this one book, the New Testament, has sparked all these different branches of faith and ways of understanding God.
It speaks to the richness and complexity of these texts.
Right.
They're open to multiple interpretations.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes them so fascinating.
Okay.
It's not about finding one definitive answer.
Right.
It's about engaging in this ongoing conversation,
Right.
wrestling with the ideas, and forming your own understanding.
And that understanding might evolve over time too, right?
Absolutely.
As our lives change, as we encounter new perspectives, our understanding of these texts might deepen or shift.
It's a lifelong journey of discovery.
It is.
Not a destination.
So as we wrap up our deep dive,
Okay.
what are some of the key takeaways? What do you hope listeners will walk away with?
Well, I think one thing we've seen is that the New Testament isn't just a collection of stories and teachings.
Right.
It's a living document that speaks to us across time and culture.
It's a reflection of the human search for meaning,
Yeah,
purpose, and connection with something greater than ourselves.
exactly. And even though it was written in a very specific historical context, its themes of love, forgiveness, justice, and hope
Yeah.
resonate with people from all walks of life,
Right.
even those who don't identify as Christian.
It's a story about challenging the status quo,
Yes.
speaking truth to power,
Uh-huh.
and advocating for the marginalized.
It's a call to live a life of compassion, service, and integrity.
And it's an invitation to grapple with those big questions. Who are we?
Right.
What is our purpose? What happens after we die?
Those are questions that have no easy answers.
Yeah.
But the New Testament offers us a framework for exploring them,
Right.
for wrestling with them, and for finding our own paths.
And maybe, just maybe in that process of searching and questioning,
Yeah,
we discover something about ourselves.
maybe.
Something about our relationship with the divine.
It's possible.
Something that transforms us.
That's the power of these texts.
It is.
They're not just words on a page.
No.
They're living stories, timeless wisdom, and a source of enduring hope.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm definitely going to be pondering these things for a while.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for guiding us through these complex and fascinating texts.
It's been my pleasure. And remember,
Yeah.
this is just the beginning.
Right.
We encourage you to continue exploring these texts,
Yes.
to delve deeper, to ask questions,
Right.
and to discover what they have to say to you.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
It was great having you.
And until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Yes.